Every day, you essentially pay your dues by doing the harder thing when it's the right thing to do. So hello, everyone in the room there. Nice to see you, and everybody online. Thanks for joining. Super grateful to be here. I appreciate asking me on and hopefully trying to share some stuff to help everyone with something I work a lot on. For those that maybe aren't familiar with me, my name is Dave, and I was a gymnast competing in college and been coaching for a long time since I was about 17. I'm a physical therapist who has a special degree for sports. I'm also a strength coach, and I run this company that does a lot of consulting work around the world and here in the States. So I'm really fortunate that the benefit of me is that I can kind of see a broad, landscape anywhere from recreational gymnastics to the elite international teams to college gymnastics to other countries. And I think this lecture is really like pulling out the patterns of what I think I see in a lot of programs that I used to make that maybe I screwed up on. And then what I think a lot of other countries or a lot of other programs, when they ask me to come in and help them, just some common themes that they also struggle with. So the hope here is to save everyone here a lot of time and a lot of headache by not making the mistakes that I did growing up and trying to learn this stuff, because I am a massive geek and I enjoy reading this kind of stuff. But I know for most people, they don't want to read research and science and textbooks. They just want to know, what can I do to help the kids in front of me? So hopefully I can help summarize some of this for everyone here. And then at the end, I'm pretty much an open book. You guys can have the slides, you guys can have the lectures. We have a lot of articles online and free stuff online that I give away. So anything you want, I'm happy to give you, or anything you would like to learn about, I'm happy to do some questions at the end. So this is kind of this is always a summary slide that I like to start with, because it feels like in my coaching career, and especially like when I was growing up, anytime I would go to a lecture or I would have like all these great ideas and I'd feel like really inspired and I'd have the perfect plan, and then I'd get to practice and it would all fall apart. Right. And so I always start most of my slides about strength conditioning in particular, about like, realize that you're going to have some ideas from this, but you're going to really need to follow up quite a bit and do things that work for your gym. It's going to be impossible for you to take the ideas that I put in this lecture and say, just copy paste it to the kids that you work with. That's just not the reality of the situation, because of our different backgrounds and the different levels that you guys work with versus I work with, and different things that I've seen. So I just always caution people to be, a little bit more self-forgiving when they feel like really overwhelmed after they get out of a lecture. I usually come out of a lecture with a lot of stick figures and drawings, and I really feel a little bit overwhelmed, which is why I gave everyone the slides. But the other piece here too was with strength conditioning in particular. I think in gymnastics, we've learned over time that A plus B equals C. So if I do these exercises 4 times a week, like Dave said in the lecture, all my kids will have perfect switch leaps and all my kids will run as fast as they possibly can. And it will be amazing. The heavens will open up and we won't have to worry about it. Right. But that's not how it works at all. Right. The reality of the situation is, you're going to find a couple things that work, a couple things that don't. You're going to find, some kids that it works well for, some kids it doesn't. And, don't be so stuck to one plan is the message that I try to share. Is like, it's going to be a lot of kind of trial and error, and also figuring out what works for one set of kids might not work for the other. And also what works for 2 athletes in one group won't work for 2 other athletes. And so I'm a big fan of teaching people about the principles and saying, okay, there's 500 exercises online that you can get from Shift YouTube channel and other people online. I'm sure there's plenty of stuff. Have a system and sets of principles. That's how you want to run your strength program. You don't want to run it based off of what's the perfect drill or what's the perfect, one exercise for this, right? It's not going to be the most effective way to do it. And it usually just gets you really frustrated. So I'm very empathetic to a lot of coaches when I give lectures, because obviously being a coach and being someone who's been through the ranks, like, you're always just trying to answer some questions that are up in your mind, right? So how do I help you be more powerful is pretty much one of the most common questions that people are asking me. Like, what can I do to make the athletes more powerful? They're trying to say, how do I make sure I get through your routines and you don't fall apart for either a performance or like a safety wise, right? Like falling on your last pass of your floor routine or falling on your dismount because you're really tired from a cardio point of view. That's a common question that I struggled with and that I also still get quite a bit. How do I know what to do? Like, how many of each exercise? Why should I do 5 of these things versus 10 of something else? I think there's a lot of really great research on strength and conditioning for sets and reps. So sets being how many rounds of something you do, and repetitions obviously being how many you do within that set. So there is a lot of really good research out there for why you would do 10 versus 4. But I think you have to understand a little bit of the basics behind why, so that when you're making programs, you're not just kind of picking numbers out of thin air. You actually have a very specific reason why you want to do that. And I'll share some examples of that later. Um, the big one now that I always still am struggling with is how much is enough, but not too much, right? Like what's that perfect dose? And I think it's really important to highlight here that the research does reflect that if you kind of don't plan your training and you kind of just throw a bunch of new stuff, whether it's new active flexibility drills you found or new strength conditioning, if you throw a lot of new stuff at an athlete who's not ready for it, it definitely might elevate their risk of injury and the performance is probably not going to be great. But on the other side of the fence, it's important to remember that not doing enough is also predictive of, or not predictive, but suggestive of somebody who's at risk too. So if you don't train hard in a smart way, it's also risky, right? I think that's something that a lot of people don't look at is like, it's not about wrapping the kids in bubble wrap and never doing challenging strength and conditioning or challenging practices. You can totally do that, but in a safe and healthy way where you're still caring about the athlete and you want what's best for them. There's a way to kind of do it in a good way, which is why this lecture is so important, because if you don't really have a plan and you're just kind of flying by the seat of your pants, you don't really know whether it's too much or not enough. And those are both concerning. So I personally felt like this growing up, in my first 10 years of coaching in particular. I was going through my doctoral work for PT and learning about strength conditioning for gymnastics. And I felt like between social media and lectures and just millions of ideas and drills out there, I felt like I had uh, lots of information and not enough wisdom is the best way to put it. Like I knew a lot, but I didn't really have a plan or I didn't know what to do with it. So I often felt extremely overwhelmed. I felt very frustrated and I felt very lost at practice, which caused me to be very burnt out. I would just get frustrated with making programs over and over again and not really getting the results that I was hopefully wanting for the kids to reach their goals. So this lecture is an effort to hopefully summarize some of the things that were making me frustrated and kind of overwhelmed and give you guys a little bit of a leg up. Okay. So these things that I'm going to share with you, I share a lot of gifs and comedy stuff in my lectures. So apologies if they're not funny to you. I think they're hilarious. But these things, importantly, are not going to be, specific drills, right? They're big picture principles. I'll give you some examples, but I think it's important to remember that I could give everyone here 100 of my favorite strength conditioning drills, right? And give you guys 5 for their legs, 5 for their core, 5 for their arms, and give you a bunch of drills. And it would last you about a week in practice. You'd get there and you'd be frustrated applying it and you'd feel overwhelmed and you would say, this doesn't work for these 4 kids, but it does for these. And so that's something that people have done to me in my education. And it was overwhelming and a little frustrating. So I'd rather just teach you some principles here and then give you all the examples you would like, so you could fill in what works best for you. I think it's important to remember that we're seeing this large wave. The pendulum's kind of shifting where we are using much more science in practice and training. It doesn't mean that everyone in this, lecture has to be a geek like me and look up the research and stuff, but you have to be informed about what's new and what's important about it. So I'm happy to summarize those things and give those to people. But I also want to say that it's not about throwing out expert coaching opinion, right? Like there's a lot of amazing coaches out there who I've learned from and who have taught me things that have changed my entire way that I approach strength and conditioning for gymnastics. And I've been able to blend those two things of science and experts. And I think that's where the best kind of bang for your buck comes. So don't throw out the science. Don't say I'm only using, what my coach did before me. And also don't go the other way where, you're only living by the numbers and the geeky stuff and you're not just thinking about what's been successful with other people. So always we're trying to think about performance and health at the same time. So we're trying to pick out things that can do both of those things. What these things are not, right? I'm not going to give you the best exercise for a kip. I'm not going to give you the best exercise for a switch leap. I'm not going to give you the best exercise for a bigger block, right? Like that's not going to be productive. I think it's going to make you more frustrated in the long run. And they're definitely not things that you can just take one idea and apply it to every single gymnast and every single level and program. So keep that in mind as you listen, because I don't want to lead you down the wrong path that we're giving you like, some magic secret that nobody else knows, because the reality is that 5 years ago, things that I swore by, I have changed quite a bit. And hopefully in 5 years from now, I'll have the same thing going on. It's always a constant evolution. So number one, most important, this is something I see missed quite a bit. Most people typically have a daily plan. They plan their practice and their strength and all that kind of stuff. So they say, we're going to warm up, we'll do some lines, some core. We're going to do 3 events. We're going to do 45 minutes of strength. And I have the circuit that I want to do, right? Most people are doing that really, really well. I think not as many people have a weekly plan about how many days do I train and what exercises go on Monday versus Thursday. How many of the same kind of muscle group or movement did we do on Monday versus Thursday, to think about what you're doing across the whole week. And I think that's really important to remember, because if you don't think about what days you're doing what and how hard it's going to be, you can quickly underload or overload the athlete to be not so productive, right? So I think it's important to remember the first thing is you have to have a rotation of intensity, right? You cannot and this is an error I made as a younger coach, you cannot just go hard every day, right? You just can't come in and kill the kids with strength every single day. It's not how our bodies work. That's not how physiology works. And it's just not productive in terms of like performance or their health. So, I didn't do it maliciously. I don't think most coaches do. I think they just want to get work done and they want to, have great training days. And some kids love working hard. So they're trying to, reach their goals. Like that's totally okay. So we have to realize though, it's not the most productive for multiple reasons. So, and I'll show you some examples down the road, but if you come in 3 days per week, right, and you have a certain number of hours, you probably want to have one of those days that's a little bit lesser intensity so that you can kind of give the kids a little bit of a break to recover in the middle of the week, right? If you have kids that are coming in 5 days a week or 6 days a week, you really have to be careful about light, medium, heavy, and off days, because if you start too aggressively earlier in the week, that's going to be a problem down the road. Okay, you have to also be able to use these plans to organize, what you're doing in terms of what movement patterns or what exercise categories, right? Like in the legs in particular, I think that's something we often miss is, there's a lot of different ways to strengthen the legs that you need to jump higher, run faster, whatever you want to do. I think a lot of programs that I audit or look at are victim of like 74 calf and squatting exercises, right? Like toe in calf raises, toe out calf raises, single leg calf raises, plyos with calf raises, then squat jumps, single leg squats, single leg squat jumps. Like they don't intentionally realize that they're maybe just putting a lot of the same stress over and over on the same muscle groups. And they wonder why the kids maybe have hamstring or glute weakness issues and they can't, run as fast because they don't have a lot of strength in the outside or back of their hips. So I'll break down those categories for you, but it's really important to remember that your weekly plan, you're trying to plug in the different movement patterns that you have and things you want to work on. You also want to try to track some of the basic things. So whether it's the number of impacts, similar routines, obviously like routines and muscles work during movements is one thing, but also like hit percentage is another thing. But just tracking, how many routines did you do? How many turns did you do? And stuff like that is important to kind of monitor how the kids are feeling from week to week. And then trying to make sure that there's, a uniform conversation happening. I think tracking is really important because in many gyms that I work with, they kind of have like a bar coach or maybe a beam coach and a vault and a floor coach. And if they're not on the same page for tracking what they're doing on the events and during strength, you very easily can overload somebody, right? So say, for example, the most common one I see in women's artistic is someone who's a younger athlete. They're working back tumbling on floor. They're trying to get a back handspring or a back walk over on beam. They're also doing some Yurchenko drills. And very quickly, they do a bunch of back bending skills over and over and over again, right? And then during their strength program, they might do a lot of arch hollow snap work to get their core stronger. But what you don't realize is if nobody talks to each other, you might have put in like 100 to 200 to 300 back bendings on that athlete in a couple of days, and their back can get sore. So you have to have communication between these people to understand like, what are you doing on one event or what are you doing on another, but also what are you doing from day to day with the strength program. If one person writes the strength program and the other coaches aren't involved in that writing process, they might not know that the kid's legs are really, really sore the next day. And so floor might have to be a little bit easier day. So just a couple ideas there, but I think the weekly plan is really important. And then when I say a monthly plan, I mean looking at, so say you're doing 4 weeks of a strength program that you write, every week can't be really, really hard, right? Just like you have light, medium, and heavy days, you have to have lighter and heavier weeks, right? Like it's very important after 2 or 3 or 4 really hard weeks of strength that you give the kids a week to deload to let their bodies recover. And I think that was something I never did growing up as a gymnast. And I never did as a coach. I never thought about that. It was just each week reset because like, well, you had 2 days off on the weekend and your legs should be fresh. But when you look at recovery times, there's a rolling accumulating fatigue that happens over multiple weeks. And so you'll often see people take a deload week where you're still training and you're still doing strength, but you're backing off quite a bit for 1 week to give everybody kind of a breath of fresh air to get stronger, right? It's a common misconception that you get stronger when you're doing strength. You actually don't. You get stronger after you do strength when you sleep and you eat well and you recover well and you drink water and you balance your stress. So nobody is getting stronger arms when they're doing cast handstands. They get stronger arms when they do cast handstands, go home and take care of themselves and have enough time in between those workouts to let their body recover. So hopefully that helps drive that point home. But so here's an example, right? So this is on the month. So say you have 6 weeks, right, where you plan a strength program in the summer. That's commonly what I do. It might take you 2 weeks to learn the exercises, teach the exercises, get the equipment, all that kind of stuff. I often refer to it as herding cats. Sometimes when I'm trying to teach a new strength program, it's very hard to get everyone kind of to do what they're supposed to do. But then you might have 3 weeks in the middle there where you can actually, people know the exercises, they're comfortable with what they're doing, you know how many sets and reps, you've worked out all the kinks, and you have 3 weeks where you can get really strong. So you kind of have those 3 weeks where you're building up. And then, like I said, you would take 1 week as a deload. So that might be a 6-week example. You might have 4 weeks where you have 1 week to teach. I usually do this with younger athletes who are newer or not doing as advanced strength. So the smaller athletes in particular, the younger ones. 1 week to teach them what to do. The second week, you can slowly build things up. The third week, you can kind of get your rhythm and do a really good strength week, and then deload the fourth week. So everybody, and there's very different reasons for why you would do 2 versus 4 versus 6. We're not going to get into that, but really the idea is just have a plan, right? Just have some sort of a plan to follow. Okay. Just a piece of advice here. I think another thing that I made as a mistake when I was growing up was coming back on like a Monday and being like, oh, well, you should be fresh after 2 days of rest. We can really go really, really hard on our strength and conditioning. And a lot of times athletes will kind of get like a very heavy training day on the first Monday they come back. And then they're really tired throughout the rest of the week because of that sudden spike from Sunday to Monday. So a lot of the high level programs that I work with that are the most successful. And when I say that, I mean high level as in like not competitive success, but they have a very successful gym that continues to be productive with whatever the kids' goals are. They almost all take Monday as like a slow ramp in day. So a lighter or a medium day. A lot of gyms will just do basics and shaping and flexibility and dance and core on a Monday. And then Tuesday is the day they first start a really hard strength program or something like that. So I've found that very, very helpful. And I would recommend that everybody maybe has that conversation. Contrary to popular belief, this is another myth in the gymnastics culture. The vacation is not what causes kids to lose their, like, kind of have their rhythm be funky or get hurt, right? It's the sudden jumping back into really hard training the first day back and the second day back that typically does. That's a spike in what we call workload, right? So when an athlete has a vacation for a week and then comes back and, feels worse or feels kind of funky, it's not the vacation time. It's the very aggressive jumping back into other program versus if you took 2 days to say, like, when people come back from a week break, Monday and Tuesday are just going to be like basics and getting back into it. And by the middle of the week, we'll slowly get back into more. I think that's a much more safe way. And a lot of people typically don't have problems with cranky, joints or soreness or maybe issues with, the feeling rusty and stuff like that. So I really want to drive that point home. It's not the time off, which causes all these issues. It's the jump back in too aggressively. Okay. Here's an example of a week, right? So maybe how you would look at things over the course of a week when you're planning your program. Anybody who maybe is familiar with my work, I'm a big fan of mixing in gymnastics specific strength and conditioning and also general strength and conditioning in the off season in particular. We could have an entire chat about that, but just for the template example here, right? So maybe like on your Monday, you do a lighter day of just flexibility and basics and dance. Maybe your strength is like an active flex program and a dance program. It's not so much the hard stuff that you're going to do that week versus Tuesday. That might be a medium day. You could ramp up a little bit more. Maybe on the events, you're doing a basics warm up and you're doing a bunch of drills on the side you like, and maybe 5 of each skill. That's a pretty common assignment a lot of people use. And then on that first day, you might do your gymnastics specific strength program that you've planned day one. You would do that on that Tuesday, right? Wednesday would be a little bit harder because you're kind of rolling uphill. You still do your basics and your upgrades on your events. And then maybe you do another general program day A, right? And then you would have this plan where you kind of take a time off in the middle here to your day is off, but also you give the kids a little bit of a break. And then you come back in for another medium day, the day 2 of your general program, and then Saturday for a day 2 for your gymnastics. And I'll show you examples of what those are. But really the key here is the plan, right? Is the plan across the week of you have a light, a medium, a heavy, an off, a medium, and a heavy, and then an off day. I can't see the right side of my screen because my Zoom link is up. So I'm sorry if I'm missing that right side. But that would just be an example of a really good plan for the week, right? And you build those into the monthly plan like I talked about, okay? So you don't have to use this plan. You can use a 3-day plan if you have kids that don't come in as often. You could use a 6-day plan with 2-a-days if you work with super high level people, but you have to have something in place to guide what you're doing. Okay, so here are some examples of, for different schemes you could use for different training options, right? With light, medium, and heavy. I've traveled a bit and done this, and people say this slide is really, really helpful. So I wanted to include it. And it's kind of just based on the level you work with, the types of kids you work with, what you would do to try to make sure the strength program is really effective, right? So anywhere from the top left-hand corner of 6 days, right, where you could do 3, 2, 1, 1, right, when you're training and have that one off day. That's kind of what we just covered with the 5-day one too. But 3 days are heavy, 2 days are medium, 1 day is light, 1 day is off, right? That might be an example. I'm sorry if my math is maybe funky on some of these now that I look at them. But just the example of knowing what days are heavy, what days are medium, and what days are light, all the way down to 1 day per week. Obviously, the 1 day you go there, you probably want to make it productive. But if you're really trying to get progress with your strength program and you're only coming 1 or 2 or 3 days per week, you might consider a little bit of a home program or something else on the side if the athletes have goals that are very high level, right? If they just want to come have fun, recreational gymnastics or low level gymnastics and not worry about it, then you're probably okay. But if they have high level goals, but they can only make it in 3 days or 4 days, because of something else going on, then you might want to consider other options to make them see progress. Okay, so here's an example of maybe a less advanced gymnast of what these plans would look like, that kind of day A and day B. This is just a snapshot out of one of our binders from Strength that, just has the plan. We have binders for our older athletes. The binder is for them. It's their own binder. They have their own programs, their own wellness tracking sheets, their own notes, their journals, stuff like that, announcements. For the younger athletes, it's typically the coach of that group has the binder that has the strength program, and they lead the kids through, because it's very hard to get 15 8-year-olds to have their own binder, right? Good luck with that. So it's more about just leading them through it. But these are just examples of trying to get a nice balanced program, from the first day and the second day that has a plan, right? Don't look so much at the exercises and exactly the sets and reps, but just the fact that we have a specific plan on day one and a specific plan on day two that have similar types of exercises we want to get, like plyos, we want to get some like power work, some rope climbs, some basics we need, but they're split on 2 different days so that we're not overworking the same thing on the same day, if that makes sense. So this would be an example maybe for a less advanced gymnast. And at the end, if you guys want to come back to this and I can break down, what this means more specifically in terms of execution and like with the group, I'm happy to do that. But just the idea that there's 2 separate days versus a more advanced gymnast. Like if we just pulled out 2 days of that 4-day program, this is like their gymnastics specific days. This might be what they do on their binders, right? So on day 1, right, lots of shaping stuff, lots of core stuff. It has different plyo work. It has some different core work, but it's separated so that on one day, you might have the front and side of your core working. And on the second day, it might be more focused on the back of your core, right? You're not going to only do the same exact core exercises every single day, every single time, because it might be overloading that area. So the other thing below is that if you have an athlete who's older, they might be having more time for strength and cardio. So then you can maybe start to talk about, okay, maybe on one day we throw on an active flexibility circuit, right? Or on another day we throw on a cardio circuit, right? Or an energy systems circuit, which is down here in the right-hand corner, right? So this would just be for the older athlete, because they have more time, they have higher level goals, they're doing harder skills, so they need to kind of have more physical preparation for it. But again, the takeaway here is that there's a distinct plan for what day is doing what and what day is doing something else. It's not doing what I did, which I call is living by the whiteboard, which is just like, did we do rope climbs the other day? Yeah, we should do some rope climbs. Did we do handstands? Yeah, let's do some handstands. Like if you just constantly are building the strength program, like with the athletes sitting in front of you, it's very easy to feel overwhelmed, but it's also very easy to miss things. So you have to have a specific plan for kind of what you want to do on each day. Okay. Number 2, we have to have a balanced program. I think this is often something I alluded to before, is that we see a lot of like quads and squats. We see a lot of calves, but maybe we don't, a lot of like front core for like the 6-pack muscles, but we don't see a lot of hamstrings and glutes and side muscles. We don't see a lot of, the entire core being programmed for. So it's important to make sure we're kind of getting a holistic view, but it's also important to make sure we're balancing gymnastics specific strength, like rope climbs and handstands, to general strength, like just general squatting or general push-ups, right? There's different kind of buckets there. So we want to make sure, here's an example of with the core, we might want to make sure we have like compression, right? Type strength to get a kip in. We also might want to have the same muscles in the front being used in like a body tensioner drill, right? Same muscles being used in a very different way versus like an arch hollow snap, right? For like a back handspring or a tap swing. So you can make the argument this goes all the way up the ladder to compression being a double twisting Yurchenko, right? To arch hollow snaps being for Tkachev. It doesn't matter the level, recreation to international elite. The same muscles are going to be working in very different ways. So we have to train them in those different ways. We can't just do leg lifts and hope that all of the other things that we need show up as well. We have to specifically program for those different things that we want. Okay. Another thing we see with core a lot is that people are very, very gung ho on the front of the core, sometimes the back and the sides, but we miss like, the impact type core. So being able to handle the compression forces and bracing under load like that. So that's, I think a one that a lot of people take away, but I think for the lower body in particular, like for getting stronger legs, we miss a lot of different movement patterns that are very, very important in certain muscle groups, right? So squatting is a different movement than a hip lift, which is called the hinge, which is very different than a Romanian deadlift, which is very different than a lunge or a step up, right? So those are all different types of movement patterns. And I have a cheat sheet that I'll give you guys, you can look at. But the reason it's important is because of the muscles that they bias, right? Like the squat is going to bias your quads more versus the hip lift might bias your glutes more versus the RDL might bias your hamstrings more versus a lunge kind of has all things together. So if we want to get the most out of the athletes for power and performance, but we also want to keep them safe, we have to develop the entire leg. You can't just train the calves and the quads and hope that everything goes well. You have to really develop holistically the athlete's legs so that it can be protected against the forces, but then also strong enough to do skills they want to do. And I'll show you some examples of these just because I think sometimes people enjoy that. So top left-hand corner, Lene here is just doing some jump rope V-ups, which are a great just compression shaping drill, right? Very easy for low-level athletes to do it, but just she has to get the jump rope up and over, and it helps her develop, kip, cast handstands, like all that kind of stuff for toe-ons, versus the exact same muscle groups are going to be used in the right side here, but she's doing a body tensioner drill for like giants, right? So she's just working on relaxing and squeezing everything as tight as she can in a front and back position, just better global awareness of body shaping, right? So same kind of core things are being used on both drills, but they're very different and specific, right? You can make the argument that like you can put the left side in your actual conditioning, where the stuff on the right could be a warm up or a side station on bars. That's kind of whatever, but you just got to make sure both of these types of things are in there. And on the bottom, a couple more examples too, like an arch hollow shape drill for giants. Again, we're using the core very specifically in the same muscle groups, but in a very different fashion, right? We're using very, very different types of core to do an arch hollow shape change. And then lastly, the same exact core like bracing that is above when she was on the wall is the same type of bracing and stiffness they have to learn to handle impact forces. So when we do plyos, that's core training, right? Like learning how to tolerate bouncing on the floor well is core training. It's just in a very different context that I think a lot of people don't think about, which is not a leg lift or not a hollow rock. So I don't think that like every one of these drills has to show up every single week, but you have to realize that only doing leg lifts or bar shaping for your core is not going to get the most out of what you want. You have to really have a nice balanced program across the entire week. Okay. And then related to the general movements that I was talking about in the top here, this is like the most overlooked, probably underutilized exercise in gymnastics, which is just direct glute training, right? So a weighted hip lift is used in many other sports and many other types of programming to get the direct hamstring and the glute stronger, which is a lot of gymnasts have issues with. They're overarched or their posture is kind of funky, or they have back issues because their glutes are not nearly as strong as their quads. So doing weighted hip lifts are pretty much the first thing I add to everybody's program that I audit or that I work with, because usually they're not doing that. They're doing a lot of squats and they're doing a lot of calf stuff and a lot of like, single leg squats, but they're almost never doing any direct glute training. So that's one. But that's very different than the muscles worked here in a split squat. So this is a rear foot elevated split squat, right? And in this, I've included this one on purpose because it definitely is working the front leg, right? You get quite a bit of work on the front leg and the quad here, but you get a lot of hamstring and glute activity as well. So this is going to be more of a mixed kind of thing, right? Like it's going to work some of the hamstring, some of the glute, some of the quad, right? It's a little bit more. Right. And then down here, you can see a single leg RDL, right, which would be tapping her shin right in front of her. And then this is a very hamstring specific exercise, right? Like a lot of hamstring activity, versus this also worked the hamstring, the hip lift, but it's more for the glute. This also works the glute, but it's more for the hamstring. So we're just doing different movement patterns throughout the week to try to make this a little bit more effective, right? And say, for example, we have someone who is really flexible and we don't want to add more weight to them. It's a little bit already aggressive. Well, we can make the movement pattern different by just making the things slightly different. So say, for example, over here, you can see her foot is not elevated on any pads. We can put her front foot up on 2 pads just to make this a deeper split squat so that it reflects more of like a switch leap, the strength you would need to be at the end of a switch leap or something like that. So it's not always about changing the movement pattern completely. It's about sometimes just tweaking things. So she's doing the same exercise, but now her front leg is up, and that makes it much more hard on the hamstrings and on the glutes back here, right? It's much more challenging on the hip versus the quad, and it's more specific to the skills she's going to want to learn. But the idea here, the takeaway is just that there's a variety of movements that are important to train for the lower body, the upper body, the core. If we only kind of get stuck in our tunnel vision of what gymnastics has done for so long, you get a lot of the same stuff. You get a lot of rope climbs, a lot of Cassie handstands, a lot of leg lifts, a lot of quad jumps, like all that kind of stuff. And they're good. I use those, but they're definitely one piece of a much larger program. So that's why the plan is so important. Okay, and moving on from here, along with like the balance of movement patterns, I think driving home the point that gymnastics in every shape and form, recreational to international elite, should be doing a blended approach of general and gymnastic specific work. And I don't really want to dive into like the myths associated with lifting weights that they're not true about getting bulky or losing flexibility or getting hurt. They're all very, very untrue if you look at the science, or damaging growth plates and stuff like that. You have to know how to do it properly. But an example here is like general plyometrics versus gymnastics specific plyometrics, right? So general plyometrics would be doing like things like hurdle hops or a ladder, right? Or things you might see many other sports do, like jumping over bounding hurdles and stuff like that. There's a very specific reason to do that, to train like elasticity. So train the general ability to be tight and stiff and get your Achilles and your calves to work pretty hard, right? But that's a very different goal on a hard surface in a gym or on some it's like runway, a vault runway, than doing what you would do like to punch the springs or to punch a springboard, right? Like it's a very different type of plyometric to learn body stiffness of how to hit the board well and hit the floor well to tumble and vault than it is to do general plyometrics, right? So you might put some of your general plyometrics in the beginning of a workout, like the beginning of your warm up, versus obviously on events, you might be doing specific gymnastics plyos for panel mats and tumbling and vaulting and stuff like that. But to make the athlete as safe as possible and to make them as high performing as possible, they have to do both of these things. And another common example that happens too is like the off season versus the preseason versus the in season, right? Like in the off season, you really should be focusing on developing as much strength as you can. That's the only time of window you have, like 2 to 3 months, to build up a lot of strength in the athletes. Versus in season, you really shouldn't be focusing on trying to get them stronger. You're trying to make them maintain their strength and focus on routines and focus on competing well, right? So that's super important, is to focus on just the thing that you have to do. But again, that's a balanced program. That's understanding what you're doing in the 3 months of the summer or the off season versus 3 months in the in season, right? And understanding that maybe in the off season, you could do more of the general stuff, the general strength training, the general plyos. And as you get further closer to the preseason and in season, you would do more gymnastics specific stuff, right? You would slowly move them down the funnel towards gymnastics specific. And there's a lot of research to support that this is the best way to develop athletes at a young age, all the way through the highest level. And I think we see the sport slowly moving towards that kind of idea because of how much good research there is behind it. Okay, so this is a summary of the movement patterns, and you guys can download this and take a screenshot or whatever else you want to do. But I just wanted to make your life easier and kind of summarize the different types of movement patterns that are in, the research, but also in many other sports. So obviously for the upper body, you have different categories here that involve different muscle groups, the chest versus the upper back. And I put some examples of things that you can do, right? From the upper body this is the lower body. Lower body over here as a typo, forgive me. Like we just talked about squatting versus hinging versus lunging versus a single leg, right? And some of these terms are geeky, so you can ignore them. But the upper body and the lower body have general movement patterns that pretty much everyone in the strength and conditioning world follows and that many other sports follow to make their programs. So we have these for core and stuff like that, but we also have gymnastic specific stuff that has to be done, right? We have gymnastic specific hollow and arch and body lines and core stuff that's very different than the general core stuff. And then we also have specific things that gymnasts need to do every single day, like shoulder opening, rope climbs, handstands. A lot of this is taken from my good buddy, Nick Ruddick, who has this awesome idea about a daily dozen, about there's like 12 categories that gymnasts should do every single day. And he puts them in the warm up. So I take some of his stuff, I added some of my own. And then I also know that based on the type of program I'm working with, there's going to be different things, right? Like ring strength for men's artistic versus active hip flexibility more so, and calf strength for women's versus active extreme flexibility for rhythmic versus air awareness and trampoline specific core for tramp. Very different, right? But this is just a nice little cheat sheet that I made to help coaches think about like, okay, I need to get a squat one day and maybe a lunge pattern the next day. I need to get some sort of like front core on one day and back core on the other day. I need to get something like, a nice hollow arch snap drill and then some sort of arch drill on the other day. Just having that balance back and forth is crucial, like I said, to keep the athletes healthy, but develop the program, to be performance driven from whatever their goals are. So number 3 here, we have to have some sort of specific goal or focus during the training block you're doing it, right? So there's types of different ways to do it where like you can develop all of the things like strength and flexibility and speed and power all together. That's one method. But I think it's important to kind of bias one thing, right? So like in the summer, you can't expect to get the kids really strong, really powerful, really flexible, really fast, right? It's not going to happen. You can't maximize all those things at once. So instead, what you want to do is try to think about, what am I doing specifically? What exercises and why am I choosing 3 sets of 10 versus 4 sets of 5, right? Why am I having the athletes do a circuit with 5 exercises versus a circuit with 2 exercises, right? Going back and forth. And there's very good science behind why certain sets and reps and goals make a difference, which I'll share with you next. But you have to think about, okay, what am I doing right now for 3 months in the summer? It's right now in the summer, where I am. So it would be, if I'm working with programs, I'm saying this is your time to develop lots of maximal strength. I wouldn't worry so much about, tons of gymnastics specific bar endurance right now, like you would need for a routine. Let's put that on the shelf until fall comes around. And you have specific ideas about this, right? So when you look at the research, if you're trying to develop strength, like maximal strength, usually, okay, ballpark here, right? 3 to 4 sets of 6 to 8 with about moderate intensity and moderate rest is usually what you do. So say you're doing squatting to get their legs stronger, right? 3 to 4 sets of goblet squats with a weight that's kind of challenging and it gives them a little bit of a rest. is probably about the best way to go about that to start, right? You can make the argument it changes, but you might pair a squatting exercise with a rope climb, right? And you might do 3 sets of one rope climb in between each squatting exercise to give their legs a little bit of a rest, right? That might be a really easy way to do a superset to get them stronger, right? Versus if you're trying to get somebody more powerful, so maybe you go through a summer and a lot of the strength is there, but then on power comes more like routines are coming and trying to get them snappier and faster, right? You can't do the same thing that you did in the strength side. So look at the third bullet, right? You would have to reduce the amount of repetitions because you really can't give maximal effort for like 8 to 10 reps. Imagine doing 8 max effort squat jumps as high as you can, right? The eighth one is definitely going to be not as powerful as the first one. So instead, what you might do is say, okay, instead of doing 8 squats, we're going to do depth drops. We're going to drop off a block and then jump as high as we can, right? To get a nice big bounce. That's what we're kind of working on. But I want you to do 5 of them and I want you to jump as high as you absolutely possibly can, right? Like max effort sprints are another one, right? Like I want you to do sprint down this runway, but you need to go as hard as you possibly can for this entire 70 feet, right? But then you're going to wait in line for maybe 4 or 5 kids so you can rest and recover, right? If you have them sprint down, jog back, sprint down, jog back, sprint down, jog back, right? The third and fourth sprint is going to look nothing like what you want, which is what fast speed with good quality. It's going to be much, much less. So as the power becomes the goal, you can still do some sets, but you have to reduce the number of repetitions. It's going to be really high intensity, but you're going to give them more rest in between, right? So that might be an example, like I just said, of maybe we're doing some cardio training or some power training. I might have them do 1 max effort sprint down, back down in a runway, and then have them go 2 or 3 core exercises or other things on the side to give them a healthy long rest before they come back and do it again, right? Instead of just setting up 20 panel mats and having them go jump up, jump down for 20 minutes. So everyone's out of breath and sweating. Like that's not really effective cardio training. That's just getting kids tired, you know? And that's a huge mistake I used to make is long panel mat lines and jogging outside, just jog outside for 20 minutes, right? Like, and it wasn't really effective. It wasn't training the thing we wanted to train. So if you were training hypertrophy, it's usually not the goal for most people, but if you did want to get, you know, some more lean muscle mass on somebody, it requires much more sets and reps, and it usually requires a little bit more intensity with less rest and more frequency. So most people aren't in that bucket, but just to kind of throw it in there. And then endurance, right? It's going to vary a lot based on what you're doing. If you're trying to get kids overall healthier and fitter, it might be some longer circuits of 20 to 25 minutes to get their aerobic system fitter. If someone's trying to get routine performance, it might be a 30-second max effort, bar basic complex to try to get their arms and legs to get stronger in a 30-second window. So that one's a little bit more in the weeds and I don't want to dig into it. But the goal here, hopefully, is to teach you that there are different reasons for why you're doing different things, right? You can't just pick random numbers out of a hat and hope that it works. And you also have to kind of use your critical thinking as a coach about like, 3 sets of 5 pull-ups is very reasonable, but 3 sets of 5 chin-up pullover windshield wipers might be too much, right? So sometimes athletes will do, or coaches will have people do long complexes, which is great. But if you do like leg lift, chin-up pullover, come down, windshield wiper for 1, that's a lot of volume, right? That's a lot on some kid to do 5 of those 3 sets. So you're going to have the quality fall apart really fast. So you have to think critically about what's the goal of what I'm working on and how do I get to that specifically. Along with that specific goal and focus, I think, again, understanding that you can work them all at the same time, but it's really not going to go well, right? You can't expect the kids to get super, super flexible and gain flexibility while you're doing a really hard strength program. Because if you're doing a really hard strength program, they're going to be sore, right? I've seen some kids literally like their splits will be down one day and then halfway off the ground the next day because we did a lot of leg circuits, right? And then coaches are getting upset because why aren't your splits down? Well, I just did 400 squat jumps yesterday and that's why my legs are sore. So it's okay, right? It's okay. It's expected. But if you expect the kids to get really, really strong and then also be really, really flexible, but then always be at their peak power for skill training on events, it's not going to work. Kids are going to be tired, right? Kids are going to be tired in hard strength programs and it's okay. But again, back to point 1, that's why you intentionally plan light, medium, and heavy days, right? If you know you're going to have a really heavy day and the next day you're coming back in because your schedule does that, it's not going to be the most powerful practice of your life. It's not going to be the most beautiful ring leaps that you've ever seen because their legs are going to be really tight, right, for a couple of days until they loosen up and get, away from the delayed onset muscle soreness. So you just have to be practical and realistic. You have to kind of give the kids a break sometimes when they're maybe feeling like they're not up to their best because they're going to be frustrated too. I've had a lot of athletes who are really frustrated that they come back from a couple hard days of training and their skills aren't quite there and they're feeling really out of it and they're tired, and that's normal. That's part of the training process. But vice versa, if you give kids a lot of really, really light days in a deload week and they're not really doing too much because they're saying that they're tired and they're sore, like, well, they shouldn't be too sore. So you got to figure out why. What is it, a motivation thing? Is it like an issue with how much they're doing and their strength? They're doing too much. Because if you give them a deload week or a light day, the goal is that the next day they're going to feel better. So this is going to be an example for just the season structure. Again, you can screenshot this and look at this a little bit later if you want, but having like a yearly plan goes into this entire puzzle of wanting to make sure that you're thinking about what things you're working at certain days. And the reason I put this up is because this kind of summarizes what I think about with like my general approach, right? And I'll put up slides up next, but like in the off season, I'm working a lot of strength, I'm working skills, I'm working upgrades. I'm trying to figure out where their levels are versus preseason here. And anybody who watches or listens to this that's international out there, I'm sorry, it's not the same time signs. But in the November area, it's like, okay, what's our level going to be? We've moved up. What are our skills? What are we doing for what events and stuff like that. So we're trying to focus on like the gymnastic specific power and solidifying what we're doing for our competition season routines versus we're just competing, right? I'm not trying to get them super strong right now. I'm trying to maximize their cardio to get through routines, do pressure sets. And then in season A, we might be doing local meets with their base routine. If they want to use upgrades, we might put those later in the season. Obviously, if you're compulsory, this doesn't matter. It's a little bit different with upgrades, but you might have two different types of season where you're trying to really peak for your big meets if you're working with, towards states, regionals, nationals, qualifiers, all that kind of stuff. So I'll break it down a little bit more because it's a little bit easier sometimes. I'm sorry if this is a little overwhelming, but I wanted people to be able to screenshot this and go back. But this is an example of an out of season approach, right? So like gymnastics wise, you're just doing skills, right? The strength stuff, you might spend half your time doing general stuff and half doing gymnastics specific, like I said, 2 and 2, but you're really focused on getting them stronger. You just want to get maximally stronger. You want to get the kids nice, strong, and fit, right? For cardio, you might want to work on just getting everybody, stronger, but also they can get through their practices better. You're setting the stage to get through routines in a couple months. Just like, strength becomes power, general cardio capacity becomes 90 seconds to get through a floor routine. So they're kind of based off each other. So you might do circuits and intervals in the summer, like 20 to 25-minute circuits with stations and stuff like that. And then we always do some athlete wellness stuff. So we might do some screening. We won't talk about that now. But a big picture is that we have a specific goal. This bolded thing is the main goal we're working on. Like strength is really the biggest goal for 2 months. And then we transition to a little bit of power work too. But then here too, we work on general kind of cardio training. And then we slowly get into more circuits down the road that are like, shorter duration, higher intensity to prep for what's coming up with skill combinations and stuff like that. And then this might be an example of in season, right? You might not really be doing so much of building up their strength and trying to do as maximal effort as you can. You're trying to just get them to perform well, right? You're trying to get them just do a little bit less. Individualization is very, very important, right? You're going to have a lot of different kids. Some that are very strong, some that are very flexible, some that are naturally more mobile, some that are not, upper body, lower body. You have to individualize the program based on what they're doing. So you have some kids that struggle with flexibility. You have to modify their program. Some kids that struggle with strength, you're gonna have to modify their program as well. And I think the biggest example is coming with like squatting. I'll just show the pictures. Oh, just kidding. Right here, right? If somebody has really stiff ankles and they're trying to do a squat, you might have to elevate their heels, right? If you have somebody who has a back injury, you might have to change the exercise. If you have someone whose knees wiggle in towards each other, you might have to do a band press out, right? To get them to kind of press out more. If you have someone who can do a goblet squat just fine, you might have to use 2 weights, right? And so this is just saying that you can't expect everyone to do the same exercise, right? It's going to be impossible to get one exercise for everyone to work. So modify things based on what the kids needs. If somebody has really stiff shoulders and can't do a handstand push-up, do a modified pike handstand push-up. Like it's just going to be a wormy, archy push-up and it's not going to go well, right? It's really going to be tough for them to get through it. And then lastly here, I know that there was some talk about culture stuff, but I wanted to save this last because I firmly 100% believe that you cannot barter with strength. And I say barter because strength is never a punishment, nor it's a reward. Strength has to be something that they're doing to increase their performance, health, and progress to get towards what they want to do. So I never tell someone, you missed your series, go do rope climbs. That's awful. But I never say also, if you guys make your routines, you don't have to do strength tonight, right? That's never something we do in any program. You never barter with strength. It's just something that we have to do. Okay. And I think that the culture lies beneath all the things we talked about with strength and power and stuff like that. Like really the culture and your values and your ethics are behind anything being successful here. So this is how I approach strength training of like planning strength, which we just talked about. But if you don't have this cultural base, it's an absolute nightmare. And so the things that I think are important to develop that, right, is going to be just admitting the fact that it's not always the best thing you have to do, but you can change it up, right? Make it a game, make it fun, make it a contest. Like you can throw that stuff in every once in a while. And I think that's been one of the more effective things that we've done. Some days, guys, we got to just get through this. I'm sorry. This is tough. This is a tough week. We got to get through this strength. But other days we might play some, this game called Ships and Sailors, which is like a cardio game. Like it's quite fun. So we might swap that out every once in a while, do contests, do obstacle courses, like all that kind of stuff. Like don't be afraid, even with high level athletes, to play a game every once in a while and make strength a little bit less monotonous. But the last thing I want to share here is if you only take away one thing from what I try to believe, right? When I talk with athletes, I tell them that it's always optional. You do not have to do anything. You don't have to do the rope climbs. You don't have to do the strength. You don't. But you do have to deal with the consequences of whatever choice you make. So if you have goals that you want to make this level or compete this skill or do this thing, and you don't want to do all the strength, okay, that's fine. But in 3 to 4 to 5 weeks, when you don't have the performance you want, or maybe your back is getting sore, we're going to have a conversation about how choices have consequences, right? This is something called natural consequences, which is promoted by Gretchen Kerr from Gymnastics Canada. It's like whatever you choose, there are consequences on the other side. So if you don't want to do the strength, that has consequences. If you do want to do the strength, that has positive consequences, right? And so that's a really good way to kind of teach these things with athletes versus forcing it and using it as punishment and pushing them super, super hard. And that's been the only thing that's made a positive long-term, relationship with conditioning, is celebrating the little things and that, but also just making sure they know they're in control of what they're doing. It's a voluntary choice to do this. Other things, I strongly suggest that you do strength with your athletes once a week if you want to build your culture to be better. I know that might make some coaches shake in their boots, but that's been the best thing I ever did was once a week. I test the workouts that I do and I give the athletes that I coach, but also once a week, I jump in and do the sled pushes. I do the rope climbs. I do all the stuff. I modify some things because I'm old now and I don't want to get hurt, but I'm not afraid to jump in there and do it with them. And they see me, working hard and sweating, and our coaches do it too. And with the 3 of our coaches group, we'll just get together and we'll do our circuit that's the same as them. And it's hard. It's really hard. I'm not going to lie, but it builds fantastic culture because they know that you're in there with them. Okay. Track some things, some basic sleep, some basic muscle readiness, some basic energy and mood. If you just track those things 1 to 10 at the beginning of practice. So how well did you sleep? 1 to 10. How sore do you feel? 1 to 10. What's your energy level now? 1 to 10. And what's your mood? 1 to 10, with 10 being the best for those categories. You can get an idea about how athletes are feeling, and you can have a conversation with them based on, is the strength going well? Is it not going well? What do we need to change? Are we sleeping? Are we fueling ourselves for performance? Are we drinking water all day? Are we balancing our schedule with school? Is there some things we need to talk about? And again, that builds a nice, strong culture around, if you do get some feedback, you can change the workout. If everyone's legs are really, really sore, maybe more squat jumps is not a great idea today. Maybe we do some more core stuff. But when the athletes see that you're listening to them and they see that you're talking to them and they see that you're changing things based on what you need to do, they really build quite a bit of trust. There's times when you are planning a hard training week and you say, hey, I know you're sore. We just got to get through this. Let's modify some things in the assignment, but this is intentional. This is a planned thing that we're doing. So hopefully that helps wrap things up full circle. But there's a lot of geeky resources if people are interested. And if you have any questions, obviously, I'm always available to chat.
We'd like to thank you if you guys want to give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope the rest of the conference goes well. And I'm going to tune in too because Kale.
Thank you so much.
All right. See you, everybody.
Okay. All right. Take care.